All right, welcome. My name is Matthew Bay. I am a senior analyst here at Rain, and with me today is Carmen Colosi. Carmen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Carmen Closi. I'm the Latin America analyst here at Rain, and we've been keeping ourselves quite busy this past week, haven't we, Matthew, with the events in Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, I think your life has been busier because of that than I have. But before we get started, I think it's worth for our viewers for you to give us a little rundown on exactly what happened, what the latest is, so we're all working from the same page.
Definitely. So on Sunday, we saw a group of rioters, specifically on the far right, storm the capital, Brasilia, and they entered three different government buildings from the three different branches of government there. And essentially, we saw them pillage and break glass and break artwork. Luckily, the Congress and the judiciary were not in session. So we definitely saw that there were not people in these government buildings, and that was very fortunate. However, there was a lot of damage done, and obviously, this was a very kind of politicized event. The demonstrators were essentially hopeful that the military would come in and reverse the result of the election back in October, which saw the ouster of former President Jair Bolsonaro.
Okay, so with that in mind, what is the next steps that we're looking for in Brazil in terms of everything else? Because I know that they've looked at into some investigations on the finance of some of the movements, some stuff like that. What are we expecting next on that?
Yeah, you're right on the money, Matthew. We will almost certainly see, more investigations. We'll likely see those investigations be led by the Supreme Court. Those investigations will be focused on a few different things: who financed what happened on January 8th, who was essentially responsible for coalescing all of these different people together. There's a lot of questioning right now around who paid for the buses that ported many of these people from the different
Mhm.
areas of Brazil into the capital. So all of these questions will be really kind of key focal points around the investigation that will almost certainly be carried out. We've already seen the Supreme Court go after certain officials, certain security officials in Brasilia for failing to act. One of the key points of Sunday's actions was that we did see a lag in time between when protesters entered the buildings and when they were finally ushered out. The lag was around 2 hours. So the question is now essentially, why was there that lag? And what we're kind of seeing is that the security forces were essentially sent home, 24 hours ish before the events happened in the capital city of Brasilia. So that is really you know, unveiling all of these questions is what we'll see going forward, and that will come with a variety of things: allegations against certain officials and arrests. The key question, though, Matthew, I think we're all asking is, will the Supreme Court essentially try to tie the Bolsonaro family to the events of Sunday, and that will really kind of dictate how Brazil will go forward.
Yeah, and I think that I know people are already making the comparison to January 6th that we had here
Oh
in
yeah.
the United States. I mean, a couple days after, of course, the anniversary, the timing is kind of uncanny there. But I think there are a few distinctions that are worth, keeping in mind. One, when we look at January 6th, at the time, President Trump was sitting in office. He was trying to call up people to trying to, do something around not to certify the elections, and we also had, of course, Congress sitting in the building as everything was going on. Whereas in the case of Bolsonaro, yes, he's been challenging the results. He even came out and said like, "Hey, don't do anything crazy like that." Well, excuse me, I
Yeah.
don't know if exactly he said that, but he did. At least he wasn't there, right? So he wasn't somebody who was clearly in a position of power to do anything when it came to responding in the same way that President Trump. So because it happened, of course, under Lula. So those are two very different timelines. So I guess it's going to be, at least in my view. I mean, I'm not of course an expert in Brazilian law. It seems like it'd be a little harder to really make it, connected to Brazil or to Bolsonaro because he wasn't even in the country at the time.
Most definitely. Considering that in the US, I know we were watching very closely how things would play out with the January 6th commission. Do you think that that's something that we could see, really happen in Brazil, that there would be this kind of similar, so to say, fanfare around a similar commission?
So I think that there could be. I mean, but and you would probably know the answer to this better than me. But I don't think we've seen the same degree of deep polarization in Brazil. I know we've seen it on the streets, but at least in the political parties where have somebody like the Republican Party that was really not trying to be involved with the January 6th Commission as much as it probably could have been if it wanted to be. I just don't know if in the Brazilian context we have the same political dispute or split where we could see it be hyper politicized and split because like of against like Bolsonaro's party versus like the rest of the of the country. So I don't know if we have that same polarization dynamic. Obviously, we have it on the streets from the protesters, but maybe not necessarily in Congress.
Yeah, one of the things that has been so interesting in the aftermath of this is really to look at some of the polling, is that we've seen
Mhm.
the events of January 8th were very unpopular among Brazilians, and that has actually tanked Bolsonaro's popularity in the polling. So that has been really interesting, and that does lead me and our team here to really believe that it would be something that could potentially be very detrimental to Bolsonaro and his family, and, essentially a potential committee such as a January 8th committee, something very similar to what we have seen in the US, could potentially see a lot more centrist and right-wing support because of that polling that we're seeing in the immediate aftermath, that the majority of Brazilians are not necessarily supportive of, the events of January 8th.
And I think what's also different about the Brazilian context is in Brazil, there's a long history of political scandals, political corruption scandals that, in some cases, like Lula's case, result in some people being jailed. So I think there's a little bit more of I don't want to say acceptance, but realization that these kinds of things happen. And I do have a question, moving forward is, um, in a if we were to get to a situation where he's indicted, or we have an investigation that does find something or whatnot. And let's assume that he's legally in jeopardy of maybe going to jail. Are we expecting continued protests throughout this entire process that are especially from his supporters while his popularity has tanked? The supporters that were clearly supportive of going into the Capitol. Those are obviously ones that aren't going to be taking right now in terms of reducing their support for Bolsonaro. So I imagine that some element of his support base would still be active. And I guess how broad would that be and how disruptive could it be?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Matthew. Essentially, what we're seeing in Brazil is that even though there's not broad support for the events of January 8th, there's a small but mighty faction of I would say far right Brazilians that really do believe that the election was stolen, the October election was stolen, and they will continue to view any sort of investigation or allegations or arrests as political persecution. And so, because they do hold this belief very deeply, we'll continue to see them come out time and time again anytime that there's an update or development in the investigations that we're likely to see over the coming months and even years. And as we've seen, this kind of small but mighty group of far right Brazilians has become attacking other areas of the country. I know that we've been talking a little bit about some protests in front of refineries and things like that. Again, they haven't necessarily targeted, oil and gas yet, but that could be something that we could see. We could see them also target ports. This group is looking to, be as disruptive as possible. And if the disruption isn't necessarily in Brasilia, we could see them start to disrupt things like industry, like highways, roads, ports, oil and gas industry.
Etc. Yeah. With that, that is all I think that we have time for. So I want to thank Carmen for joining me. And if you want to hear any of my analysis or Carmen's analysis, please visit us at rainnetwork.com. That's RANE network.com. Thank you.
Thank you so